Shirley here with Jupitalis, and first of all, happy 4th of July to those who celebrate. Um, I looked at the solar return chart or the current transit chart for the US Sibley chart, and the main thing that pops, kind of like we're past Pluto return. Uranus has not ingressed yet, so it will ingress this year, but this is not showing for this year's solar return chart because Uranus is still in Taurus. And I think it's going to give a little bit of leverage for the US to deal with the ingress with um, as a transit. Okay, because as of next year, we're going to be having Uranus in Gemini for the US Sibley chart, um, which is a different effect. I don't know to tell you how to assess this effect in a chart of a country, just something that comes to mind. However, the eclipse axis is of Virgo and Pisces is with Rahu in the 4th house, and the ruler Jupiter is in Jupiter return. So it's like, oh, fantastic time for the people, except that Jupiter is in the 8th house of the US. The Jupiter return for the US is, being Jupiter in the 8th house, a part of it is the onset of the many millennials that begin to awaken to Gate Project, and that's the unique thing that I can talk about, and I don't even know if my colleagues in the US can actually make a podcast about that in astrology. So this is something I definitely began to see as an astrologer situated outside of the US. Um, People in social network calling out my colleagues. Why didn't you mention the violation of the First Amendment? Why did you mention the death and concentration camps to the homeless people? Um, and yes, COVID was a global thing, but there are certain American things that were left out. And I think Jupiter in the 8th house is going to set the tone because it's a big highlight. 8th house is house of birth and death, but it's also external funding. Um, the Jupiter ingress. I don't remember if the summit was in the Jupiter, if the Naval summit was in the Jupiter Cancer already. I think yes. And that was a changing of a structure. So U.S. addresses its external funding, which is Europe. U.S. is in national debt. Somebody funds for NATO, and U.S. is like, oh, we fund for NATO, we fund for NATO. No, you do MkUltra and do economic hitmanship in all of NATO. So, yeah, I think that if those things are not defunded, it can lead to dissolution of the countries that fund NATO. It's kind of like, slavery has an expiration date. People just like can't do this anymore. And so Jupiter is a happy planet, and in Cancer it is exalted, but the 8th house is definitely the topics that in everybody's natal chart or in everybody's chart, the 8th house is what people tend to swipe under the rug. Okay, so if for Navo it is Aries, which is the application of the MkUltra and the torture of the people, of the veterans, of the people that later become the veterans and later that have their PTSD about that, then that is swiped under the rug, and the rituals of trafficking that used to get people to pay and then extort them and assassinate them later, that is swiped under the rug, also done before elections in any country. So very likely including the US. However, US also gave us pragmatism. US also gave us a nation of people that actually tend to their 8th house, that actually tend to their own psychology and emotional psychology. US gave us a lot of these things that that it's actually from the people, moon, and Jupiter's the ruler of the moon. So it's from the people in the US that we know what we need to know, even if we live outside the US. So, how will Jupiter return ruling Rahu in the kind of solar return chart of the US affect the coming year? Well, with the eclipses and Jupiter being in the 8th house of US, it is gigantic emphasis on the collective trauma and the tending to that trauma of the people by the people. So I believe we're going to and how that is affecting a lot of Americans are wondering, okay, why is my investment not yielding? What am I invested in? Why am I keeping to hear that my country is in debt, where we're supposed to be, the land of the free, um, and and at the same time, the awakening from the gate projects and the pink fluorides, people begin to ask themselves, well, has my country spent the time to enslave its people and then complain that they don't want to work when they work 2, 3 jobs and can't afford a housing, and turn to the other countries it economically hitmaned to fund the very military project? And so for many people, they're going to pop the question. They're going to have this grand awakening. The moon rules not just the people, but also memories and cancer. Jupiter Cancer in the 8th house, people are going to have memories regarding remembrance, okay, regarding what is affecting their investments, because it's also the house of investments. Um, what is affecting their collective national trauma? Has their patriotism been used against them, which is something that all countries wonder, but with the US it's so accentuated because both rulers of the people are being highly accentuated. Both the 4th house ruler, which is in the 8th house, having a return, and ruling over Rahu, which is further accentuating. There are going to be eclipses related to the people of the United States. So I'll be looking to see what do American people have to say, because this is the people. We will not hear it from astrologers. We would not see it in the media. It's only by direct communication with the people that we get to know what is actually happening, and that affects the entire world. So MkUltra you see in Beersheba city, okay, all around, okay, people not being able to even come close. It's not just to talk about the government, because when you have a project like that, there are certain issues in mental health that are viable to the recovery of someone from a mental health crisis that people can talk about. There is not just philosophical but scientific and medical implication to the question of the mind and the matter and the consciousness, and the physical aspect and the psychological aspect, but also the energetic aspect, the frequency aspect, and to some dare say even the spiritual aspect that you cannot talk about. There is the ESP, that and the way ESP is trained, unfortunately in unhealthy ways, by torture, and the dissociation, the use of sexual violence. There's so many things that a person coming to recover, let's say from sexual violence, or a person having a depression, or a person not being happy at their job. There's so many things that any professional cannot even address, because they pertain to that secret, top secret military project that no one can recover from. And this is where the taxation goes. It doesn't go to housing, apparently, okay, because the house flipper took over Section 8, and all the rest of the sections. It doesn't go to education, because people need to be trafficked to have a degree. it doesn't go to health, because the American pays health insurances even higher, regardless of Obamacare, so that people will blame Obamacare. Okay, so that people will blame Obamacare. Um, I can say in Israel, where people are envious of our medical security, is that you that's not exactly medicine what's going on there. People commit suicide because of the treatment they got in hospital. So I'm not saying that that isn't great medicine, it's just that it's highly filtered. And when you talk about actual recovery, you need to address certain things that come in supposed conflict of interest of these projects that are supposed to protect national and international security. And then it comes to the investments, because eighth house is the supposed passive income, but also the retirement money, um, and the shared assets. So it's the boli-colis, it's the 401ks, it's the life insurances that people have. And even when it comes to the science, you think about the fact that teeth insurance is something that is considered. I remember I saw an American business that was priding themselves in funding teeth medical insurance for their employees, because that is considered an extension. And then the people would go to get their teeth done and have fluoride in, have xylitol in, have all these things that are actually not constructive. And then you have business owners, um, you know, bending over to try and make their employees have the best care that they can, while it doesn't matter what you do as an American. um, there is something humongous that is at the heart of any ability to make money, and it's kind of looked like in Soviet China. People having to comply with intelligence when it comes to their businesses, when it comes to orders, um, shipment, holding a business, um, being registered, and all the eighth house. So the eighth house is the taxation, the eighth house is the paperwork, but it's also uh, uh, um, what is required to run a business in the state that is registered in the government, and you can't run a business that isn't. So that is something that I predict to be a great awakening. This is why Jupiter return in the eighth house is not as exciting as other houses, because this is house of a lot of the traumas, right? It's the taxation, it's what happens, it's the funerals of people, and it's the birthing of people. It's the ancestral lineage and ancestral curses. In the chart of a country, it's also the external funding and the investment of the country. And so the people are going to be questioning things, which is adding to the fact that USA is one of the earliest Uranus returns, perfection by the degree, that we have in Uranus Gemini. And so Uranus has, the Sibley chart has Uranus in the 8th house Gemini, in the 8th degree Gemini. And it's close to Aldebaran. However, it means that it's going to be one of the first big Western nations to go, and I'm saying one of the first because I really need to check all the other Uranus in all the other charts, but let's say Israel is towards the end, Navo towards the end. Um, and so it's going to be one of the first nations to go through the revolutions designated with Uranus return. Labor revolution, human people having anything rights revolution. People are going to have to want the economy to accommodate for the people. That's simply what Uranus and Gemini means. Particularly child rights, labor rights. Yes, it is gender by the merit of Mercury being about playing with the gender roles. Okay, it's kind of an alchemical planet. So it's not in particularly feminist revolution, it's just by the merit of things being counter to. And so the feminists play into that, the right to vote. Okay, so it's not the central freedom of Taurus, but rather the right to vote. It contributes to that, but it is not a feminist sign. Okay, I say that because those are also the years where we had later the suffragist movement and waves of feminism, and and this is a byproduct of Gemini, but it's not it's not Uranus in Gemini. More things I can think about in the chart. Um, well, Aries would be the fifth house, so Saturn Neptune is going through the fifth house. Um, I don't know how to do perfection years for such. Since 7076, what would be the perfection year? I don't know how to do that. Computational abilities, so let Americans do that. Um, uh, any other things? So we have Pluto going through the third house, um, with Saturn in the fifth, in Neptune, but I think Uranus is the interesting one. Perhaps my colleague can comment on the Pluto transit and the fifth house transits. Another thing is that Gemini is the seventh house. We have Ketu in the 10th house, so it usually means purging of leaders, the leaders of a country, and I think it denotes of some sort of a change in the leaders that we are going to see with the Uranus ingress to Gemini. And that is, one of the things that I've been saying in Israel a lot is that notion that a president or a prime minister can finish their term and go, cycling back home. And if it sounds weird to you, then I'm also half Dutch. People actually do that. The prime ministers actually do that. Okay, the king does that, and so the notion that a prime minister can just finish their term and go back to their home, cycling, having a coffee, mingling with the people, and doing normal. This can only happen in a genuine democracy. Does any country have a genuine democracy? So I know that there is a curse about each president being like assassinated or something like that. I don't know if it's going to be to that extent, but definitely I think that that there's going to be some sort of a revolution in the coming year and a half, that is going to purge the leaders. And it's not about competence, it's not about with blue or red pill. It is about the astrological setting that is visible right now, and highly accentuated 8th house year. Mercury is ruling Ketu, and we have Americans have Mercury in the 8th house, which is in Cancer, which is where we get all the awareness to the psychology of language, using linguistics in commands, but also in MkUltra. The importance of language in recovery, and all the PC talk. Okay, that's another thing that is associated with that, because Cancer is a very emotional sign. We want our words to honor our emotions. At the same time, it is how anything Mercury ruled is connected to the 8th house and connected to the people. So it's giving riots. It's giving riots. Okay. And now Mercury is transiting Leo. So for the solar return, Mercury is in Leo, just releasing from opposition to Pluto, and just and in its shade period. So I think that all these manners of communication, yeah, the sun is in the eighth house. So the sun ruling Leo is in the eighth house. So again, it all leads to the eighth house. Um, it's it's a year where, it, yes, there are going to be some accentuated traumas, um, some new, some old, some purging of the old. Um, and they're gonna have to do with funding. I'm not saying there's gonna be like an economic crisis. This is not. Yes, I'm not saying there isn't going to be, uh, but definitely it can be one of the manifestations of a highly accentuated 8 year with a stellium in the eight, um, and it's affecting the people directly. The people are expected to absorb, putting anything people related in the eighth house is the people are expected to absorb the national debt, um, and absorb any fiscal decisions that supposedly the state makes. All the while, genuine democracy is not really okay. You can talk about the structural changes of having a representation. Oh, taxation and representation. I've been getting that since Raoul was in Gemini. The no taxation without representation. Uh, it's going to make a comeback. I don't know to predict the onset of that, but hey, taxation is the eighth house. So no taxation without representation is going to make a huge comeback. Now the thing is, most people, I know that there are weapons in the United States, but most people are not armed with the almost indigenous witchcraft that is done, and it's not done because, okay, let's just say it that way. Um, that that type of witchcraft is how colonialism happened to begin with. So, and no, it's not the witches. Okay, so so this is also affecting housing. Think about haunted housing, um, and that's another problem that is going to require, yes, the living spaces to be energetically compatible to the people. Yeah, and then Leo is the ninth house, so Mercury now in the ninth house, Pluto in the third. Um, I don't know how that manifests, how that Pluto Mercury opposition manifests for the Sibley chart. Um, Perhaps international people talking about the US, or people beginning to become aware that people beginning to become aware that they are Americans in many, many ways, not just in terms of the permeation of culture, but in terms of the effect of the economy and the military projects. So, in many cases, American problems are the problems of all of us, because we are all affected by those things, and um, and therefore I think it's going to be a permeability where people that don't live in the U.S. Um, begin to talk about those things, and they're not seeing the facts because they don't live in the US, but it's kind of like, hey, MkUltra has arrived at their stuff. What is the origin of that? Where is the information of that? Well, it's a US military project. Who is enforcing that? NATO. So why is it in Israel? Was it also in Gaza? Is it also in Iran? We don't know. So that is something that is beginning to pop, and I think a lot of the people that learned American all their life through culture, through acquiring the language for having better job opportunities, or international sector, begin to realize that they have been more Americans than they have been told. Okay, so been more affected by the social engineering of America than they have been told, and by the merit of not actually living in the U.S., um, they they begin to speak up, and so this is where the revolution. Uranus is not a local planet, and Gemini is a local planet, but is in the seventh house. And this is how I think the American Revolution, or the upcoming American Revolution, is going to be quite international. In that sense, it's like we are all today. It's not 7076 anymore. We are all affected by the problems of the U.S. We are all affected by the fiscal decisions of the U.S. and just like I live in Israel, and they say the Rothschild and the Templars that kind of own Israel or founded Israel are not a local community, and then many people are affected. Think about Pfizer. The entire world was affected by the rat lab that happened in Israel. It's kind of like, hey, how would Israelis respond? Because if Israelis let that happen, it's going to happen in our regions too. And Israelis were like, folks, are you going to stop it? And so that might be what is happening with Americans right now. And for the many things, very likely that we don't even know what is happening in the land of the free. So I think that the third house, which is pretty much a local house and local environment house, and the ninth house, which is an international house, begin to have this opposition, because with people being usually required to a decorum, it's kind of like, yeah, I respect your culture, I don't live in your place. And I was like, what is this MkUltra? Are you guys doing something about that? um, what is this thing happening? You guys doing something about it? They're sitting in another side of the world, and so it can create this opposition where, hey, you don't even live here, and it's like, if I was living here, would I be able to even talk? And probably not. Okay, and and that's something um, that creates a confrontation, and at the same time it's necessary to have the ninth house. It's necessary to have the international community speaking, and it's necessary to have the people speaking, and both are important in the discourse. And we can't really talk about you do it to your land, we do to our land, when the distinction and this sovereignty and autonomy does not exist on a fiscal level, and so on and so forth. So it's kind of like the problem that Israel has as well. However, United States deal with that first, with the Uranus ingressing, perfecting on the 8th degree in Gemini. So this is where it's kind of like your own country is going through a trauma, and then it's not going through that alone, and this trauma is affecting people internationally as well. Think about the children of Yemen. Think about Israel being considered a pedo, how do you say it? Pedo farm? Like something, it's a hospitable place for pedophiles, but it's not pedophiles. They don't act alone. And so how that is affecting, what is happening in other places, including the US, that is considered top human trafficking. So people would just like escape to Israel, how that is affecting Israelis. But for other countries, they can tell about how that affect, their own people. That you can barely go around Europe even, or have travel content creators without making mafiosi hand gestures. And that comes from Italy. The hand gestures is an Italy thing. So it's like, what is the mafiosi hand gestures doing in all American content creators and European content creators and travelers channels? Is there even a sovereignty? And so, as per the solar return of the US, there is this big eighth house accentuation, and perhaps some sort of international conversation about the leaders, because Leo is ruled by the sun, and that is namely right now the dramas that happen in the White House, the consecutive dramas. And there was a new general appointed today, on the 4th of July, in Belgium, because it's naval. And I think this is a very fascinating strategic decision, um, in the 4th of July in Brussels. So that's something that I woke up to today. NATO, I would love to say NATO fangirl, but the fact that they had to use human trafficking to raise funds is kind of like taking the joy out of, basically, you know. And it's because of the trafficking. It's not about people having sex or anything like that. It's no, I'm a sex positive person. It's because of the trafficking thingy. Um, and people say, "Oh, it's funded by our taxes." No, not no. What is funded by your taxes is the concentration camps and work camps and death camps for the people. That's not over there. I mean, it is funded by your taxes. You're supposed to absorb that on taxation, but that would be. And some people say, well, if you don't stop that and so on. Yeah, the no taxation without representation was a very bloody revolution for a reason. And there are a lot of questions because we're not in John Locke days anymore. Americans are not really armed against their government. They're not really equipped to deal with the violence of the government, and that can mean that they're gonna have to rely on a stronger nation to do so, which is, in the case we gotta have something like that coming up, um, it's going to be quite the risk, and it's going to be very challenging. Um, so yeah, I just pay attention to the fact that the requirement for other countries to fund for the NATO is uh, ending with a 4th of July appointing of American general, okay, American general in taking a place in NATO, um, and appointing him in Brussels, which is reasonable given that all the countries are required to pay their supposedly fair share, and the EU is centered in Brussels. So this is something that the 4th of July is opened with. Um, and that can be one of the symbols of this, even Mercury opposing Pluto in its shade period, um, because it's the ninth house with the sun in the eighth. And so taking the most symbolic US thing and putting that in Belgium. Okay? Um, which I think is like whoever thought about that was a genius. But we see the nuanced, hidden. Um, I'm not saying war, but definitely kind of response of the EU to that, and I think everybody is aware that this is 4th of July. Um, that this is 4th of July as well, and this is an American general making it all the way to Belgium to participate in a ceremony um, that is in NATO. And so Mercury is those little details, and I think that it cannot be that those details are not meaningful. I think everyone kind of sees a certain trajectory, and there are various interests that have various desires to become sovereign, and I think that it's kind of like MkUltra versus patriotism, because the people in United States, they are the first to suffer from that, and then the other countries kind of want to define their sovereignty in the face of a U.S. that kind of became an almost British Empire. Okay, so what would this Uranus bring to a country that became almost like the British Empire in terms of its fiscal activity and fiscal entrepreneurship, is a question. The Saturn Neptune in Aries is about the West. It's not about communist countries, but about the most individual, supposedly sovereign conglomeration, having a reality check and dissolution of things that no longer, structures that no longer serve. The motivation behind these things is in Aries, it's not in Capricorn. The motivation behind the 1990s dissolution was of Capricornian Saturnian nature, which, for example, you could not have orthodoxy. You cannot talk about Orthodox Christianity in the same freedom that you can after the dissolution of the USSR. And then people could go to work in the West that is actually more Orthodox, okay, because the West was Europe back then. This is more Christian, it's by the Vatican. And so the Vatican would have a banking incentive for the dissolution of the USSR. When it comes to the motive in Aries, then the world degree is kind of like to take over the world, but the motive in Aries, the motive to take over the world is to be sovereign. Because like, hey, if the entire world is compromising their sovereignty, then the only way to be sovereign is like to take over the entire world. And this is the duality of Neptune in the world degree with Saturn. So the motivation behind what we will see is sovereignty, and I don't know how it will manifest. Again, Aries is 5th house, and Aries is ruling the military. So this is also naval. For naval, it is 8th house, and so naval, NATO. Okay, very interesting 4th of July. Just want to put a warm word out there for American people, because it's very likely not easy to be an American, and at the same time, when you look outside, if I think about it, the Israeli myth of a villa in the jungle, then Americans also have this notion, very likely, in other words, because there is this, hey, that is the closest we've come to actually having human rights. And that is not anywhere near human rights. So this is not about, oh, the West is that one is better. It's kind of like, no, that is actually the pinnacle of individualism, and there are problems at the top. So when it comes to this year, it's going to be, again, each and every individual chart meets it in their own way. But particularly for those Pisces placements and those Cancer placements, natal charts, is going to be a very important year, and not the easiest. Okay, not the easiest, because it stirs up and dredges up all the things that that the conglomerate of what we call the Sibley chart or the United States have swiped under the rug. And can't do so, okay, no more in that sense. So yeah, within that, I hope people still get to celebrate. Hope not too many people explode to death in the in those celebrations, because they have this barbecues and the and so happy new American year.